Hello, good morning. It's lovely to have your company this morning and welcome. My name is Sasha Twining. I'm going to be your moderator for this session. The last day of the JTP meeting, and it is, I have to say, only right in the European Year of Youth that today is very, very much focused on young people. So this session is going to cover the issue of supporting youth and retraining youth and people in regions affected by the transition, and we're also going to look at the role of youth in driving transition forward as well. So the issues that youth are particularly concerned about, those that they find very important to them and want to do something about, but also how they can get involved in the platform and the transition in these particular regions as well. So there is a lot to cover today, and you will notice that we have already started the polls. So I do hope that you will take a moment and click your answers through. So I'm very pleased to say that we have with us today Commissioner Ferreira. Lovely to have you here, the Commissioner for Cohesion and Reforms. Thank you very much for joining us. And also Commissioner Schmit, Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. It's great to have the pair of you here today. Thank you for being here. And thank you for agreeing to listen and respond to the concerns of our youth panel. So let me introduce our youth panel for you. We have 6 members of them today, and if I can start on my left. First of all, Lorenzo Manca. Lorenzo is a Climate Justice Coordinator for Generation Climate Europe. 25 years old, passionate about climate issues and the opportunities offered by changing the economy into climate neutral. Has a background in European studies, already written a report on youth engagement in the implementation of the Just Transition Fund. It's lovely to have you here. Briefly, Lorenzo, what do you want to get out of today?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And yes, the Youth Coalition I represent, Generation Climate Europe, is really that our core mission is to reconnect the young people to the European institutions. And I'm very glad that the Commission has decided that 2022 is going to be the European Year of Youth. And these dialogues are really a good opportunity, on one side, to understand what the European Union can do to support youth engagement and youth issues in the climate policies, but also for us to understand how we can support the European institutions in that.
So looking to connect. Sitting next to Lorenzo is Luciana Miu, co-founder of the European Youth Energy Network from Bulgaria, is the head of Clean Economy at the Energy Policy Group. She's also a European Climate Pact ambassador. Lovely to have you here, Luciana. And just very briefly, what do you want to get out of today?
Thank you very much, Sasha. It's great to be here with everyone. Briefly, what I and the European Youth Energy Network would like from this session is dialogue. It's talking, it's listening as well, because we believe that dialogue is the key to a transition that leaves no one behind, but also a transition where what we leave behind is fit for purpose for the next decades of climate mitigation, which are going to be led by the youth, some of whom are in this room. Thank you.
Definitely a lot of listening and a lot of conversations today. Sitting next to Luciana, Piotr Czerniewski. Piotr is a member of Fridays for Future Poland and a chairman of the Young Locals Association, already involved in his local just transition process. His bachelor's degree is in economics and is focused on just transition in mining regions. Very briefly, what do you want to get out of today?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. When it comes to today's panel, I would like to share my experience related to my involvement in Just Transition, because in my region we managed to actually witness all of those issues we are going to talk about today, and we came up with some concrete solutions that can take care of the needs of young people in mining regions. Thank you. Thank you.
Piotr. Thank you very much for joining us. Then moving over to my right-hand side, we have Anek Moonan, who's the president of the Dutch Youth Climate Movement. That's the Netherlands' largest umbrella organisation, uniting some 100,000 young people. She specialises in generational justice. Lovely to have you here. Briefly, what do you want to get out of today?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I think I can very much agree with obviously what the other people in the panel have already said, but I think in general I would like to get to some sort of mutual understanding of what a just climate transition really is, and hoping that we can look beyond, not just looking at what that does for maybe the next 10 years or next 10 years or 20 years, but also beyond that, and not just here in Brussels or here in the EU, but maybe also elsewhere.
Annick, thank you very much. Sitting next to Annick is Giacomo Corso, officer at the Metal Workers Union, the oldest and largest metal workers trade union in Italy. Prior to joining this organisation, he was the national coordinator as well of the largest student network in the country, been very active on the student campaigning front. Giacomo, what do you want to get out of today?
Thank you for the invitation. I want just to try to highlight the needs of younger workers during the transition.
Giacomo, thank you very much. And finally, Linda Rudolph, who is joining us today from LIAG, the energy company, 23 years old. In her role, she looks after the interests of the young people, both within the company and also in the wider area as well. Very briefly, Linda, what do you want to get out of today?
Yeah, first, thanks of the invitation, and I'm here because my region is currently in a mind of structural change, and we have the big issue that many young people leave our region and the workers get older and older, and today I'm here to talk about these problems, and I have also a big project our company has, and yeah, I think it's great.
Well, it's great to have you here, and thank you, all of you, for being here. So there are lots of different reasons why people want to be here, but I think it's fair to say, most of all, they want to be here for the conversation, to hear answers, to get questions answered as well. Let us hear from yourselves, if I may. Commissioner Ferreira, would you like to start?
Well, first of all, let me thank all these young people and all those that are online for their engagement, because in fact we in Europe, we had decided already in 2019, it sounds a long time ago, we had already set our target in making sure that our economy in Europe and our life, the way we travel, the way we live, would be aware and in conformity with the emergency, the climate emergency. Now things became much more obvious that we have got to do it also for strategic reasons, because in fact, when we see the war, we see how much also energy is a source of finance for weapons, to make it short. Of course, to make this transition, some regions, some of those that you just mentioned, you mentioned Lusacia or Wielkopolska. I was in Silesia and I visited and I'm in contact with. But in fact, those regions that had an economy and where the jobs depended and depend still a lot on carbon emitting industries or on mining, for those regions, the effort to find another destiny for those areas, to find other businesses, to find other jobs is immense. And this is the reason why the Commission has created special financial support to help to minimize these social and economic costs. But for this, also in Italy, in southern Italy, we have one of those spots. For this, we need to know how and when and the speed, because the closure of decade-old activities and businesses, there are still about 250,000 of miners in Europe. So how can we reskill those people? How can we create new opportunities and create conditions for new business to come? This is the reason why in a dossier in which both my colleague here and myself, we worry about is trying to create jobs and good jobs in all the places in Europe. And of course, we have created a special instrument to help this change. So we have the instruments, we have the thought, now we have the vision, now how to do it. And for this, we need your energy. Young people have got to be engaged.
Thank you very much. I jotted down here, we need to find another destiny the regions. And I think that word destiny sums it up so very well, because it has the passion and the foresight and the future with it. And you had a lot of smiles around the room. Commissioner Schmit, let's turn to you and your thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you, Elisa, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to have also the opportunity to exchange with you. And I must say that Elisa referred to our big project, which we launched from the beginning of this Commission, which is the Green Deal. But I think that young people have a big responsibility in that, because I think the Commission became aware of not only of the issue, which is a vital issue, climate change, but also the strong engagement and commitment and of Europe's youth. Because when we look, by the way, at Eurobarometers, we see that nearly 100%, it's about 91% of young people identify fighting climate change as an absolute priority. And I think here Europe is responding to the expectation of its youth. Now, we all know that fighting climate change, as Elisa has said, is not an easy task, because this means that we have to restructure, we have to change a lot of things. And okay, there are regions suffering more. We have to find responses to these regions. There are sectors who have to adapt and adjust. You're working in metallurgy and steel. These are sectors with high emissions, so we have to find the technical solutions which exist. But this means that we need high investments to do. But also we have to change a bit the way our societies and economies function. Because the Green Deal is a major challenge, not just because it needs these huge investments, but also it goes into our daily lives. And we have to convince people that if there is this need for change, it does not mean that their life is worsening. Their life can be much better. The quality of life should be better. And that's also something which young people say, that they think that fighting climate change also improves their health, improves their well-being. And I think this is a major issue. My last point is, certainly, we have to give you the means to build up this new kind of society, this new kind of economy. And that means first education. I think a lot is in education, a lot is in skills, a lot is also in the possibilities, in the new opportunities we create in the regions which are hit by the transitions, to build up new. It's not to say, well, we have to close this factory, we have to close this coal mine, and what after? So we have to get solutions, alternatives. And that means also for people to be prepared and to be skilled for this new kind of activities, for this new kind of companies. And I think this is a huge opportunity for the next generation, or for your generation already, and for the next generation. But we have to give this next generation the right means, the right resources to be up to the challenge. And I think you're all ready to take this challenge, because I think it's a vital one. And therefore, in a way, there should be no alternative. And there is no real alternative but creating something new. And I think this is a challenge for all young people, and I'm very happy that you are engaged in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wrote down the right resources and the right means to move forward. And when you said that, there was a lot of people I saw nodding. The engagement is, Luciana is certainly agreeing with that one. There's a lot of engagement here. So what we're going to do now is look at the results of the polls that we have been running. So quickly vote if you have a moment now, and we'll run through some of the answers. Then we're going to open this out into a broader conversation with some questions and answers. And I'm hoping that the commissioners will also, as well as answering questions, will ask questions as well to have a good dialogue going. Now, our first question that we asked on the poll was, if you are from a JFT region, to what extent has the youth been involved in the transition process? Overwhelmingly, the answer is to some extent. So I think we probably would all have hoped to have seen to a large extent, but no, to some extent. And then the second question, has the youth been involved enough in the process? Well, Commissioner Ferreira is looking at this. No, overwhelmingly no is the answer there. Has the youth been involved enough? No. Would you like to respond to that? What may have gone wrong there?
Definitely, yes. That's why we are trying to stimulate this dialogue with the young people, because things are starting. They are just starting. The Just Transition funds are being prepared. We selected the areas as areas on which statistically we could see that not only there was a lot of negative impact on the climate, so very, very heavily dependent on carbon emitting activities, or depending on jobs that would eventually close, like mines that don't emit, but they are in danger. And the percentage of the workforce that was depending on those activities. So this is how we selected the Just Transition areas. And now the different member states are asked to work with the regions, with the local authorities, being them the marshals or the municipalities, and including the stakeholders in the discussion of how they are going to revitalize the area, to manage the change. And so one of our messages to these authorities is that they have to engage also young people, because of course they are preparing these monitoring committees, these accompanying committees. They are asked to listen to the different entities on the ground. But because sometimes the stress and the difficulty of organizing things overcomes the content, and we don't want that young people from the area would be put aside and not listened to and not engaged into this transition. So I think it is still time, because we don't have these programs and these plans are not finished. They are being prepared now. A lot of member states are still working on them. So it is the right moment also to tell them, and we are telling them, engage the NGOs, engage the trade unions, engage the municipalities, sometimes even the churches or whoever is active on the ground, but engage young people as well. So it is very timely that we make this, we organize this meeting and that we send this message.
Very interesting next poll that we asked. We asked two questions that were linked. The first one, we asked you to answer if you were not part of the youth. So those maybe in positions like yourselves. So if you are not part of the youth, and we asked whether the views of the youth were listened to or acted upon. And overwhelmingly, the answer was that the voice of the youth was heard, but only some opinions were acted on. And I'm seeing some nodding around the table now from the youth panel. And then when we asked that same question to the youth, we actually had the same answer, that our voice is heard, but only some opinions are acted upon. Luciana, let me bring you in on that one, because you're nodding at that. So some things are listened to, but not all.
Thank you, Sasha. I think that's absolutely true. I think that whatever effort needs to be made for meaningful youth engagement needs to be very deep. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. And I'm afraid to say that at least in Central and Eastern Europe, maybe Piotr can speak to this as well, in Romania and Bulgaria, efforts to engage stakeholders overall tend to be a little bit superficial, and that is doubly so for youth engagement. And I would maybe bring in another topic here, which is the capability of institutions to actually do this, whether we need to hone in on some problematic areas and regions of the EU where administrative capacity is low. It's very possible that certain opinions are taken into account because they are opinions that are most readily available, whereas you are missing out a large portion of marginalized youth. I think that's a big problem, but also more generally a deep dive into what young people actually think. So I would maybe bring that nuance in a little bit, talking about what capacity do we currently have to do this in a meaningful way? Does the Commission, does the EU need to step in a bit more to ensure that member states do have this capacity? Because I'm afraid to say for Romania, the answer is no.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I thank you, Luciana, for having raised this issue, because this is one of the most relevant aspects and most hidden aspects in how to organize any sort of regional development. And in fact, we just published a report, and I would like you, because you are very engaged, to consult it online. I have the printed books, but that's not for you. You travel light. So, check the 8th cohesion report that we did, and on which also my colleague Nicholas his concerns are very much reflected. The 8th cohesion report shows how you have evolved, and you show that one of the fragilities in the process of development of the different regions in Europe is the quality of the public administration. And in fact, we are not only working with Romania. In the case of Romania and Bulgaria, we are working together with the World Bank and with some other international institutions, but we also not in a specific general directorate that is DG Reform. It's called DG Reform. But in fact, every year, member states or municipalities or regions, they ask for technical support to reorganize their services. And now with these recovery and resilience plans, we can even finance the implementation of those plans. So you can really look at a certain institution. It can be the region or the municipality or another institution, a university, and you can ask, okay, what is the way to refit the whole thing by training people on digital techniques, by paying for the computers, and so you can create skills, check the flow of the procedures, and also how to accommodate all the different opinions that come in. And I think also from the technical support, we are trying to give technical support to NGOs and entities that want to participate, but sometimes they don't have the adequate technical capability or know-how. And so this can be financed through a technical support instrument that, or technical assistance that goes together with the proper funding. Because the quality of what we do is sometimes more relevant than just funding, because how to use it, that's very, very critical. So thank you for this. And when I ask you, when young people, they are, and I'm glad, because in all generations we have this. The topics change because life changes, but when we are young, we want things to change. Sometimes we want them to change, but we don't go a step further and address how to do it. So it cannot be just a kind of a Christmas tree thing. We want, of course, we all want, but this is not a contest for the world beauty contest. So when you want peace in the world, of course we want it, but how to implement it, how to do it. So when you make your contributions, try to address concrete problems and to say what we could do here is this, and why don't we do this in another way? So I'm not trying to block your critical spirit, but then, because you are knowledgeable, you are capable, so go a step further, because every time I listen to this kind of constructive ideas, I see why not, in fact. And so it's very important that you come forward. And if you need technical support, just use it. But of course, there is a learning by doing of democracy as well. And the country I know the best also had to learn how to live in a democratic, we learned from all the other members at that time. And in fact, I often say that this was probably the most important thing we learned from Europe. Of course, all this funding, but how to work in a democratic environment, how to listen to others, how to incorporate the opinions of others. And I think it's something that changes the way you do things and the quality of what you do, and that is very important.
Annie, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just thank you so much for that answer. I think I like the way that we're going towards this, or taking this topic of youth participation in a more nuanced way, because too often I notice that if we talk about youth participation, we only talk about if it happens, if youth are being involved. And I notice the same kind of phrasing in the polls, and that is fine. But I think Luciana already pointed out that it's not just if, but it's also how. And I think there's much more to say about that. I hope that comes in later. But it's also a nuance that I wanted to add is when. And I think that's one of the big points as well that is still something that we should focus on in the next couple of years, is that it's not just if youth are being involved, but when in the process. Because too often, and I can speak from experience in the Netherlands, we're being consulted as one of the last stakeholders. And when we're being asked for our opinion or our feedback, constructive feedback on the papers, on the plans that are before us, we're basically being told that not much can be changed anymore. And that, in my opinion, is not meaningful youth participation, because then you don't really allow youth to really constructively talk and discuss about where we should really put our funding.
Commissioner Schmit, did you want to come in on that?
Just a few remarks on that. I think it's really key, because this transition is really something, first, which affects everybody in his or her life, the way how we live, how we work. This is something which directly goes into our lives. And therefore, it's not only a technical aspect, which can be handled by technocrats top down. Because if we want this change to be a success, to keep our societies together, because that's another issue. We have to keep societies together. Social cohesion. I like very much what you said also about the marginalized youth, because we forget very often the marginalized groups. So I think we have to make sure that the ownership of this transition, the ownership of this change process is as large as possible. And I think especially young people, they, as you said, like change, they want change, but they have to be also, or have to get the feeling that they are the actors of change. And that's what we have to provide. Well, we try to tell member states, well, you have to associate civil society, unions, social partners, and so on. We know that this is not really happening, I would even say at a large scale. Unfortunately, because the reactions may then be very complicated and very negative. We have seen that in some countries, by the way. And therefore, I think we have to build this ownership issue. And here, young people, who are the driving force for the climate change policies, they have to have their place in this process.
Thank you. It is clear there is a lot to talk about the technicalities of how to get the youth involved, who should be involved and when. Commissioner, I saw you write down when on your notes and underline it. Yes, it is that when, that timing that is so crucial. So what we will do is we will return to this later to give it a really good amount of time to work out exactly how the youth can be involved more and when and how that will work. But what I'd like to look at next is the next question on the polls, and this is where we will start our discussion. We're going to look at the issues, the things that are most important to youth. So we asked, what do you think are the biggest concerns of the youth in the JTF regions? And we gave you the options here. A third of you said the overall lack of prospects for the next generation in the region. Also very popular. Loss of jobs, increased brain drain and out migration, lack of investments into the region as well. So those areas are absolutely crucial, but the overall lack of prospects for the next generation. Lorenzo, do you want to come in on that one? The overall lack of prospects, you know, from your experience, what have you seen?
Let's say that my experience is mostly related to what we have been talking about so far. So basically youth engagement and how concretely young people have been engaged in the just transition process so far. Because so far we are still in the phase where the territorial just transition plans have been made by member states, and political decisions on the content of these plans have been made, and young people are supposed to be engaged, and the Commission has been promoting their engagement since already more than 1 year ago. So they are providing concrete manifestos, concrete guidelines also to member states, and now even concrete funding to youth associations to really be able to engage young people in the political decisions around the just transition. And what I could see is that the main issue is that there is a general lack of exchange of information from grassroots to the European institutions, because in the last months, my organization has been working on a report on how young people have been engaged in the just transition mechanism so far. And this report, this work started after following a debate with the members of the European Parliament in November, when they told us very explicitly that they hadn't received specific information on the issues of youth and on how youth had been engaged until that moment in the territorial just transition plans. So we thought about filling this gap of information by looking ourselves in the different member states and across as many regions as possible how young people have been engaged, and reaching out to interview those young people so that they could tell us their story and we could bring it directly to the European institutions. And from the interviews we could collect, I would say that there is a general sense of discomfort and of lack of possibilities, because it's even extremely complicated in these regions to find youth associations to approach, to ask them if some form of youth engagement was implemented and whether they were engaged. Because they say it's quite natural in our region when you turn 18 to just leave it, and in the vast majority of cases you never return because you go study in a more suitable context, and you see there are no opportunities for you at home, and so there are not even so many youth activists on the place to really fight for youth engagement and to bring their issues to the local authorities. So I would say that the main issue that I could saw all across the European Union, but in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, South or North, was that in these regions there is a general lack of perspective for young people that feel like their future cannot find a place in their home region, and so they abandon it, and there are just a few people who resist and who remain there to really keep struggling also for youth engagement.
While you were speaking, there were a lot of nods, and it is a fairly depressing picture you paint, that actually there is not the youth to engage with because the youth has already gone, and when you get to 18 you're expected to almost to go. Piotr, do you want to come in with your experience on that?
Yeah, actually in my region there's the problem that Lorenzo has mentioned. And the problem is that people emigrate from the region because they don't see the perspective for them. Mostly the young people emigrate to bigger cities because they don't see any educational offer in my city. Because we have a local university, but they have their educational offer of degrees is not very broad or interesting for them. So that's why they choose to go to college to bigger city. And I think it's not a problem that they go to bigger city because they can gain a new experience, but the problem is that they don't come back. And that's the biggest issue. It is because they see actually the problem is that the coal industry is going to be shut down, and they don't see perspective after that. So they are afraid that the job market is actually very unstable, and they don't see any job opportunities for them. So actually, in my region, there are a lot of job offers related to the lower degrees or lower education. But there's very few offers for people with higher education, so that's why they literally can't find a job in my region. That's why they decide to stay in a bigger city and don't come back. And I think it's a very pity because we need these people with higher education to come back and actually, give some experience from them and their contribution to building a better economy in my region. I would say another thing is that people don't see any career counseling because they don't know what they want to do in the future. They don't know how the change is going to look like, because I think my region is a great example of creating a just transition plan, but I think it's not very well communicated and presented to young people because they don't know actually what the region is going to look like in the future. Is there going to be enough jobs? What are the change is going to be about? And that's why they're afraid, and in such unstable environment, they don't want to risk their careers or their personal lives, and they just choose what's more suitable, and they choose to stay in bigger cities. Also, I think there are some issues not strictly related to the coal industry, but some issues that comes out as an outcome of existence of coal industry, and it is that actually it's one industry and you don't have small businesses. We have very very few amount of some local small businesses. And some politicians still dream that we should exchange one big company related to coal with another big investor. And for me, it's not a solution. We really need small businesses, and young people actually, they see they then don't have much opportunities to actually set up a new business. Because they see those opportunities again in bigger cities, and they don't have much funding, much technical support in the local area to actually make this all happen. I think I'm talking a lot, and I have much more to say, but I think I'm going to finish right now because I said, the most important things that I wanted to.
I promise we will get as much in as possible. Now, I'm aware that Linda and Giacomo haven't spoken yet, so I'll come to you in a moment. But Commissioners, would either of you like to respond to those points that there needs to be smaller businesses, maybe, and it's the education that is needed to keep people, and to then, obviously, they raise their families, they stay in the area. Would either of you? Mm-hmm. You want to?
Well, I think Piotr is an expert on the issue, because I've seen that he is studying the particular issue of transition in his region, in a region which is a coal region, which is very much affected. So I think what he says is absolutely right. And the point is, what has to happen is that, the closing of this coal industry has to go in parallel with the development of new activities. Because I'm coming from a region which was affected from a steel area, which was very much affected by the steel crisis in the 70s and 80s. And the point was, how can we develop at the same time that the steel mills are closing or reducing dramatically the creation of new activities? And this is the big challenge. We cannot just say, well, now we close and then we see. No, we close and we develop. And this is the challenge for young people, because it's absolutely right. If young people do not see any perspective, any prospect, well, they say, well, my father, my grandfather, and so on, they worked there For me, this is over, I go somewhere else. And therefore, it's important now to have really plans to promote investment, to promote investment also in the right infrastructure, to create systems which support entrepreneurship, because it's not just attracting companies to the regions, it's also giving young people the idea to create their own company, to create SMEs, to create startup. We are at the same time, we are closing some sectors. We are also in the period with technological development of huge new opportunities. Digital, for instance, therefore, digital skills are so important, especially for young people, to give them the possibility to create activities or to work for companies or for activities which might not be directly located there, but now distance is not anymore an issue. And therefore, that's perhaps a chance for these regions, for remote regions, because distance is not playing the same role. So I can work, I can develop activities somewhere else. So I think this is something absolutely key. And once young people have left, they won't come back. And then the vicious circle of depression starts. That means that once the young have left, well, it becomes a depressed area, very difficult, and you know it very well. To relaunch that is quite difficult.
Can I add something? I think it's very important, and I want to give you a view from Lusatia. My company is one of the biggest companies in our region. We have more than 7,000 employees, and I think if we go out of coal industry, there is nothing. We have many smaller companies with only 10 workers, and I think it's a big issue. And the young people go because we have nothing. And I want to give you one very important meaning, because we are not against the new technologies. We want to do it, but we need the time, and the time is in Germany for our region 2038, and I want to say that we need this time.
Well, I think you as Nicolas said, you are experts. We all are saying the same thing. However, I mean, in Lusatia in particular, and in Brandenburg area, there are, I mean, some of these big companies, I think they have already seen that there are alternative business even in the energy sector, and this can help to reshift, because what was done on the basis of carbon and coal, I mean, and carbon based can be done, and now there is some of the companies, and I don't want to to address specifically any company, but some of them are already developing the know-how, how to build solar panels, how to redo the fields that had been excavated for coal in order to grow, for instance, wine trees. And I visited, for instance, in Greece. They are using the ground, because the ground is very fertile, to create, to grow lavender and roses and all the different, and developing an industry of cosmetics and perfumes. And so when we address the issues, sometimes we manage to find alternatives. But one important thing is this initiative of small businesses being able to be created around it. And in fact, as we diversify the activities, and 7,000 people, and this, even if it is not a big area, but 7,000 people is workers, means that you have about 3 times as many inhabitants. And so this starts to offer in the present times opportunities for businesses. So also the refitting of the ground, the dismantling of the big buildings, even the cleaning of the soil is quite a very sophisticated work to be done, that needs to be done. So sometimes there are opportunities that come with it. But it is true that, particularly in certain member states, and I don't speak about the Netherlands, where there is in fact a very active also capital markets activity, but to raise the capital, to evaluate the risk, and to bet some money in a project by a young person, if it is someone that is technically very well prepared, is something on which we all have to learn from each other. But because there are so many examples going on, and some of them can inspire others, I think that's the point of having this platform. Because in a platform, the point is, okay, what did you do? How did you solve this problem? Because we can create means, but then we get inspiration from exchanging ideas with each other. And so this is the reason why, we look at certain areas in Poland, but when I was in Katowice, I was in Bytom, and for instance, we look at Bytom, and there is a huge, obvious potential touristic area there. It's amazing what you can, the kind of things that you can invent. So I'm sure that young people can take it on board and develop a project and can publicize it in the net. So, yes, it's difficult, but if we have good ideas, if you have this will, we may change, because it's not the first time. As Nicholas was saying, he comes from a steel industry area. I worked for a long time in the textile area where everything collapsed. There are areas that were concentrating on shipbuilding, and they have changed completely their profile. So we can really think a little bit out of the box. And who can think out of the box if not the young people? So you see, there is an interest here. It's you. You can think out of the box. You can use the internet, as our generation cannot, because it's something that came later to our life. For you, you live with internet. And so, and this creates opportunities that are spaceless. So you can have a better quality of life in a place where you don't have the congestion of the big cities. We can move to big cities. But then if you want to raise a family, if you want to have a good quality life, it's difficult because it's very polluted, because you have the traffic, because the rents are extremely high and you cannot afford them. But so why not thinking of creating other areas, other environments in these places where you often have abandoned houses that you can rebuild and where you can easily have a good quality of life. So this is starting also to be addressed across Europe, not only in relation to these areas, but to areas that were depopulated, where people in fact left. And then people, when they are qualified and they have a good idea, they say, why not going back? And in fact, for certain, of course, you cannot live in the desert. You need to have access to basic goods, and basic goods now it's good internet. And that's why we are really worried about creating with these funds access to the internet all over the place, on top of course, clean water, health systems, education system, and some culture. But if you have already a university, like you were mentioning, Piotr, or if you have a technological center, or if you have a seed on which to anchor what is missing, you can really create a very interesting ecosystem in which it may be a good option for young people to live, rather than emigrating to the big cities or emigrating to other countries, and because then you lose so much. You gain a lot, but you lose so much.
There is an expression, if I may, and I hope this translates, but what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Yeah. And, it is a fantastic idea to move to an area with less pollution, more space, a lovely place to bring up your family. But you need the finance, you need the jobs, And I think Piotr's comment about how do you ensure that one big industry is not swapped for just one other big investor, but actually you have more of a diverse, thriving ecosystem which can then support people sort of going forward. How do you do that? How do you ensure that actually the infrastructure, the ecosystem is there for lots of smaller businesses all together to come in and start from scratch and grow?
Well, let me not answer your question because it's not, I mean, the silver bullet answer is fraud, doesn't work. But it is not from Europe that we can go and, okay, solution is here. We have got to create local energy, and from the local energy, from the people that are on the ground, because that's where you find the energy to do things and the ideas to do things, because one size doesn't fit all. And so what we can discuss is experiments, things that work, things that didn't work. Another aspect that I think we have got to address is, of course, we all want to get a job, and I know, but more and more we need new entrepreneurs, people that really have bright ideas and that can start a business. And for this, we need to have a banking system that answers to this, that really recognizes, and that doesn't only concentrate on lending to build a house or lending to buy a car, but that is capable of creating, and there are other elements. That's why I was mentioning the Netherlands, because there are lots of fundraising instruments and activities. But in other countries, everything is very much based on very, very big companies and very stable kind of investment. But also with the funds, you can create some risk capital. You can create some support for people that are in university and probably have a bright idea. And there are business angels that exist in some areas. I mean, old entrepreneurs that come and help you to organize a viable project. And then you can do it. So we need fresh blood also in the economy, because when you have just a big city that is competitive, or when you have just an industry, or you have only one sector, then if something goes wrong, the fragility is there and everything collapses. So diversity, well, I'm not against big companies, but big companies by themselves, they incorporate a lot of risk as well. So the mixture, and there are big companies that are intelligent enough to subcontract a lot, to create a kind of a cluster, to have a kind of a system on which you find small spaces, and from small initiatives, they can grow. And so we have a lot of support exactly for small companies. And in these just transition areas, one aspect that has got to be addressed, and we are prepared for that and waiting for that, is some lines, probably not the biggest part, but some lines to stimulate new activities also from small and medium companies. And you can really start a business like that. I hope with this, for instance, in the areas that I visited, this change from a coal-based kind of activity into cosmetics and fashion and tourism and growing flowers, and it's engaging lots of young people, very well qualified, but that's starting to do things and to start perfumes and soaps and making them visible internationally. So, I mean, there are lots of things that can go on, but for this, there is, I mean, if I would tell you, yes, I know, I'll solve it, I mean, I would be lying, unfortunately.
It is such a tricky question. The Netherlands has been mentioned a lot, so Aniek, I'll bring you in a moment. But Giacomo, we've not heard from you, so bring your experience into this.
Yes, in my experience, it's correct. We need both small and medium industries, enterprises, and also bigger enterprises, because, for example, transition need big budgets to change, for example, an oven in a foundries. So you can't have just SM enterprises because they wouldn't have probably the means to follow the transition. I think there is also another problem, the time. Like Greta always said, we don't have time. IPCC, the UN, always every year publish a report with less time to achieve the transition, so as to permit for us youngers a good life in next decades. So I think there is also a need of more planning of the transition, because you can't leave, how can I say, to the decision of a little stakeholders in every territories the direction of the change. You have to prepare plans from EU level, and our generation, for example, seeing the EU, his institution. We recognize the EU as one of the most important institutions. So from the top of the EU, we need a plan that gives us a target with definitely with a good definition of the means also, and middle target to achieve. And also we need that the EU in a bottom-up dynamic, listen to all stakeholders and all social parts, but not only there is the question of the when to involve youngers and stakeholders and social parts. I think there is a problem. Many times institutions first decide, then ask to the other social parts, what do you think about it? Here there is a problem, because institutions need also our knowledge, our know-how, our point of view. So if we are involved before the decision, before the publishing of the directive, for example, the regulations, also you can have a better point of view, a better idea of every solution, every means that students, young workers, businesses, from the small to the bigger, can suggest to the institution. And also this would avoid problems in the realization of the plans, because if you don't involve stakeholders before, after the publishing of the plan, for example, you will find problems because you didn't think about this problem that could be present in a local context. Or in a particular sector. The other thing I think is we need a broader perspective. For example, JTP is very focused on energy still, that is my sector of activity. But we need also in automotive sector a plan for the transition. A fifth of the emissions in Europe is because of transport, mobility, and private mobility is one of the most dangerous problems, also for the quality of life of people. I represent workers. Many of them have low skills and not so high salary. So how can they buy an electric car? How Volkswagen, Stellantis can guarantee to sell as much cars as they need to have a good business, a good result at the end of the year? If we don't address also this problem with a plan, also with the automotive and other sectors that I don't mention now, we will risk to face a lack of transition, of solutions in a very important part of our economy. And if we don't address this problem, many guys after school, after university, won't find a good job, won't find a good perspective for their careers. So I ask to you what you think about this thing, the planning in as short term as possible, and the broader perspective of the JTP in other sectors not mentioned in the actual plan.
I think you're really pointing out some crucial issues. First, I would say that what we need at all levels of those regions affected by transitions, and there are many, and we always talk about coal, but there are many others. There is automotive, obviously, but there is chemical industry and a few others. So I think what we need is first keep investment in infrastructure, because if you start lowering down the infrastructure, then you give this signal that this region or this is lost. Second, you have to maintain public services. This is absolutely key, and we see that very much in depressed areas or areas with so-called old industries, public services are decreasing. So I think we have to keep public services, also to keep people there. And then I think Elisa has said it, we have to be more innovative for financial instruments, to finance new business, to give young people who want to launch a startup, to give them the possibility to do that. And here I think the classical banking system does not fit into that. So I think create the financial capacities to finance precisely the transition. Now, just a word on one of the sectors you mentioned, which is a key sector in Europe. 14 million people work in the automotive sector. Foundries, because you have mentioned foundries. Now, with electromobility, there's no need for foundries anymore, at least for the engines. So we have now to engage the transformation of these suppliers, because it's about the big automotive companies, but it's much more even about the suppliers. And suppliers are all over the place, very often close to the big factories, but sometimes also in many regions. And they are medium-sized companies, but they are the job giver for many people in this area, and helping also jobs and all the other activities. So here we need, and I agree, we need a plan. We need to know exactly what are the transformation. First, I think reskilling people, finding new activities, because the skills are there, because people who have worked in this kind of companies, they have basic industrial skills. Now, you have to reskill them, you have to upskill them, but first you should use the basic skills they have. And this is a good starting point. And if we lose these skills, they are lost, and then we are going down the drain. So I think we need these plans. We need to do that with the stakeholders, with cities, with civil society, with business, obviously, also, and build alternatives. Now, if we have electromobility, well, you need other components. You need other solutions. We have to rebuild our whole network in terms of to provide the electricity for the cars. Batteries certainly, but this is more the big industries of batteries. But we need more battery plants in Europe. There are a lot planned now, which have been started now. So and schools, obviously, schools are key. We have to put schools, technical schools for young people in these areas, in order to give them the skills we need for rebuilding the areas. And that's also something very, very key, because otherwise we will not manage this transformation.
Lots of different things that have been mentioned there. I've written down education, finance capabilities. Lorenzo, I know you want to come in, but I promised I'd come back to Anik on this one, because when we were talking about finance capabilities there, you were nodding as if this is something that you really feel very passionately about, how to get the finance, the right sort of finance, to the youth so that they have that that platform.
Yeah, I was nodding because when we talked about the right kind of funding and that it has to be available, one of the things that I thought of is that it's not just the availability of funding, because indeed in the Netherlands, for instance, this is not so much an issue. It's also the criteria that we use, and that is a huge obstacle, especially in the climate transition. I think in general for entrepreneurs as well as for young people, is that banks, but also other people lending out funding, is we only look at profitability, and obviously that is something that we've been focused on so much for the past decades. But once we offer a sustainable solution or a sustainable alternative to the way that we've been doing things for the past few decades, I think we should be looking much more at what value that can add to society. And that value is so much broader than just financial value. But when you apply for funding, not just as a youth organization, but as a sustainable entrepreneur in general, we still hold on to those old-fashioned criteria. And what we see happening is not just as youth organization, but also as I said, as sustainable entrepreneurs in general, is that they don't get the funding because we're looking at the wrong things. We're asking them to prove things that I don't think they should be proving.
Yeah, that's important.
That is such a very good point. Do you want to come in on that?
Just to agree with what you just said, and I think that is an issue. Although the branch of social economy is starting to develop and it's starting to be recognized. And I would just like to add that because some of the activities, they are not immediately profitable, although they have got to be later on sustainable in their running, but for the initial investment, this is the reason why also in cohesion policy we have grants. So we have grants that if you have a good project that fits into the kind of framework that you are trying to address, you can have a grant. And then you have got to make sure that you don't depend on the money for the running of the business. And I think that's why I think cohesion funding and social funding really have a grant component, because not everything, and sometimes you have to have an investment that you can never recover. It's really, and for instance, if you do some sort of more in the public works, but if you do a huge system of water supply, the initial, if you had to recover through the price of water, the initial investment, that would be completely prohibitive and nobody would connect. So this initial amount, this initial investment can be covered by grants, which means that you don't have to reimburse it. So this is logic behind it, and take some sort of infrastructures to the less developed areas where in fact the economies of scale don't exist to start with. This is the logic for supporting this with grants. And I would just like to add, if you allow me, Sasha, just a small comment on the timing that you mentioned, because in fact, behind the just transition support for the adaptation and for the as smooth as possible transition in the most difficult areas is a commitment of the area of reducing or even stopping their emissions of carbon. And so this is the precondition, and you cannot finance an area just for a normal transition. It's to anticipate. And the more we see what is happening now with the war in Ukraine, the more you understand that you've got to speed up this transition, and the more you need these funds. But having said this, please make sure that we are not going to tell the region how to adapt. It's bottom up. It's you. It's you in your region that have got to be the actors of change. And of course, we ask member states, because some of the big companies that are operating there, they cannot be managed their change managed, or alternative companies to come only at the local and regional level. But in Poland or in Italy, we are asking the member states to consult locally, to bring forward the proposals of the people that are there, and of course to mix the national approach or international approach with the local feeling and local ideas, because they know what you know on the ground what are the other alternatives that you could do with the capabilities that you can develop or that you have already. Okay, thank you.
It's very interesting points. And actually, to go back to your point about the finance, maybe it should be possibly in the future less about the financial return and more about a social return. And if that could be built in. And it will be interesting to see what shareholders and stakeholders actually feel going forward, because maybe they will start to feel that is more important. Lorenzo, I promised to bring you in with your experience on this one.
Yes, because my impression from the intervention, the answers of the commissioners is that there is a basic assumption in how we are regarding now the just transition and the impact that the just transition mechanism will have in these regions. The basic assumption is that on one side, the just transition mechanism is supposed to create new economic activities that will be innovative, that will be inserted in the new value chains, and we create jobs that will require skills owned by young people. So this inevitably will create job places also for young people because it will require new skills. And on the other side, the just transition mechanism is also supposed to reskill and upskill the workforce that is now employed in fossil fuel production and on fossil fuel intensive industries, also for these new economic to work in these new economic sectors. But at the same time, and it's particularly interesting the fact that you mentioned that you always remark that this must be a bottom-up process. So the Commission cannot tell the regions how to restructure the development, but the ideas have to come from the regions and from the member states themselves. But here I would like to stress a point, because when working on monitoring youth engagement with other NGOs that work on monitoring the implementation of the just transition mechanism in general, like the WWF or like Bankwatch, these NGOs often stress the point that in these regions, since they depend on fossil fuel production, and since the coal companies, the oil companies, the gas companies have a considerable amount of power, not just in terms of economic power, but also in terms of political power, because they are a very dominant actor in the social tissue of those regions. And of course, they are also one of the main actors sitting at the tables where the decisions are made on the future and on how the just transition mechanism is going to act in their regions. So one of the biggest concerns of monitoring NGOs is that actually the just transition might end up, thanks to some loopholes in the regulations, to support the demise of the fossil fuel industry, instead of actually ending up supporting the birth of new economic sectors that will actually serve the interest of the community. And so far, I know that the Commission is still discussing in member states the territorial just transition plans, and unfortunately this is not a super transparent process, so that monitoring NGOs cannot have access to the drafts and cannot know in what direction this is going. But it's really a serious concern that the fossil fuel industry, given their dominance in these local communities, could have a very extremely strong role in shaping the territorial just transition plans to their advantage, rather than the general advantage of the local community. And since we already said that young people generally leave these regions, and so they cannot physically sit at the table, those who sit at the table and those who drive the bottom-up process are the very industries that are supposed to be closed sometimes. And this could lead to results that might not be the ideal situation we are describing, which is new economic sectors which require new skills, which will employ the current employees and require new employees, which can also be young people. So my question in the end is, how is the Commission making sure that the territorial just transition plans do not end up favouring the demise of fossil fuel industries and actually favour the birth of new economic sectors and the upskilling and reskilling of workers?
Giacomo, I know you're desperate to come in here. Is it specifically on this question as well? Please do.
Yes, I would ask about financing and the bottom-up and top-down relation in the transition. For example, what do you think about improving funds for social safety net that can help workers to reskill or upskill during the reorganization of a company or during the closing, after the closing of a company? I have an example in my region, a factory in the mountains, so a fragile territory was closed by the owner, a multinational group, using our safety net, social safety net that we have in Italy. We guaranteed to the workers, women mostly, the time to reskill so as to have a new investment from a new owner, from a new company, passing from production of coffee machine to production of green materials and production really in the path of the transition. For example, SureFound during the pandemic was very useful for millions of workers around the EU because it supported with the rules, European rules, it supported the regions and member states to help people. I think it was a very good example of how you can help member states without a top-down strict approach, but with a coordination of member states and regions in their policy.
I noticed, we'll come to you in a moment for your answers, but I noticed, Piotr, when Lorenzo was speaking, you were nodding as much as to say, this is a question I really want answered. So, and I think it plays into your question as well, Giacomo. How do you ensure those given the support aren't just those left in a region because everyone else has gone?
I was nodding because I had the exact situation in my region that Lorenzo was describing, because in the beginning, people weren't really focused on social issues or workers' issues, and all of the stakeholders, they were mainly focused on energy transformation or infrastructure investments. So at the beginning, when I showed up at the first meeting related to just transition, nobody obviously invited me because nobody was thinking about young people back then. And actually, I showed up and I started to speak about our issues that we should include the youth situation in the just transition, and everyone was very surprised and they actually didn't understand why is youth related to just transition, like how. And I said one particular sentence that if you're going to be focused on infrastructure, you will have new fancy roads that no one will actually use in the future because there will be no young people in the region to actually use these roads. And actually that actually opened their minds. And after work of NGOs, after my work and workers union of workers, actually they understood all of the stakeholders and mainly the Regional Development Agency, which is our main body responsible for the just transition. They understood that the just transition should be focused on all of those issues related to social things, environmental things, and economical things. And after that, we started to making some workshop groups related to all of those areas. We actually I managed to convince the Regional Development Agency to make a special workshop related to youth. And actually, I want to elaborate more about what you said about that we should actually take into consideration the bottom-up ideas, and we should actually show our ideas. So actually, we managed to do this because we made those workshops in schools. We had a lot of workshops in schools and final session. And we actually managed to collect all of those issues that we discussed today. And we managed to actually come up with 23 concrete transformation projects. And I think that's the biggest achievement, that most of them are included in the Just Transition Plan. So actually, a lot of you were mentioning the fact that young people are reached out after there is a proposition, after there is a draft proposal. And actually, we have finished our proposal in October 2020. and the Regional Development Agency started to making a draft Just Transition Plan in November 2020. So it was after our session, and when they have presented the final form of the Just Transition Plan, it was February 2021, and it was almost perfect. And I was very surprised that I don't have to once again say that we have to include youth and etc. So I have a very small amount of my advice on what to change in the final draft plan, and all of our, I would say most of our ideas were included. And I have to say that what's my issue right now, it's what Lorenzo said, that there are some projects related to youth in the plan, there are some projects related to miners and etc. But there are also projects related to the main mining company. And there is a project that's related to creating new jobs in green energy, because the mining company, they want to change their profile into a green energy company. So I'm afraid that most funding will go to this private company, which is, by the way, possessed by the richest man in Poland. And I'm afraid that most funding goes there, and there is a very few funding for our projects that are included in the plan. So we may call it a success that our ideas are included in the plan, but I'm afraid how these ideas will look like, because they're just a small sentence in the plan. How are they going to look like, and is there enough funding for those ideas? Because no matter if it's just transition or other policies, I always witness the fact that some politicians tend to implement some ideas into life, and they boast about how they care about young people, how their idea is so great, and we can't see the effect of their projects into real life. Because, for example, local authorities from my region, they implement some internship programs from young people, so they can go to some companies, gain experience, and those internship programs are only reserved for a small amount of people, not a vast majority of people. Or, for example, these internship programs may be interesting, but they are not very well promoted in schools, so nobody actually knows about these programs. So actually, that's the main issue. If we have these great amount of projects related to young people, to actually to actually ask young people how can we implement those great projects to actually meet your needs and make them really work in real life, and not be only reserved for a small amount of people, because I think in mining region, we really need these solutions to be available for vast majority of young people, so we can have a real effect of those projects.
Lovely, thank you. I'm sure there would be politicians who would disagree with some of the things that you have said, and say that they would obviously act for all. I have to say, I would love to have been in that meeting when you stood up and started saying, but what about the youth? Let's go back to that crucial question of how the funding is distributed and how to ensure that it doesn't go then to organisations or to ideas that would not necessarily help in the transition, but it goes to people who then are there because they are still there, which I think was your initial point, Lorenzo. Who would like to? Please do.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking Piotr for sharing this experience. In fact, from our side, I speak very, I mean, me and not me and the old colleagues that work with me, we speak a lot with, and we insisted a lot on this kind of consultation with Minister, I'm not going to say Gregory Puda, and with the Minister, with also the Secretary of State Malzogata, and then I never pronounce the surnames right, so forgive me for that. Or with the Minister Mara Carfanha, and trying to go into that they listen to the because not for us. Sometimes ministers are worried with the big picture, and this kind of exercise is needed. And you are telling me that in fact things are working, so I hope things are working, but not working for a paper with like you said, with a sentence, but with content. The fund has, the Just Transition scheme has, as you know, 3 dimensions. And these 3 dimensions, they have differentiated approaches. And of course, if you need infrastructures to create new activities, to create a new a new industrial park, a new area for new businesses, or if you need to create infrastructures not for industry but for housing, you may use it. So it's a three-component thing. Nevertheless, the funding is not for the company. The company may use other funding, not just transition fund, but other funding, if from the national programs or whatever for refitting but the Just Transition Fund is to tackle the social and the economic impact of the transition. It's for that purpose. Also, the fund cannot be used, this amount cannot be used to pay in the name of the company for the polluting pay principle. So they have polluted, they have extracted what they wanted from the ground and from the air and from the environment. Now the repair is part of the responsibility of the company, so that cannot be funded by us. This is part of the responsibility, social responsibility of the company. So, of course, we have got to look into all the details, but we are, these are the principles. It's not for the company. Of course, the company may, and some of these are big conglomerates, some are publicly owned, and sometimes a company that is somehow related comes in with a different social name and with a new idea. If it is a new company in a way, even if it is public owned, and in certain countries this is very common, a new company with a new environmentally friendly alternative idea can be financed. But if it is a big company, it has got to be identified in the initial phase of the program. So now we're asking member states, if you have a new company that wants to invest there in doing something that is an alternative for creating jobs, for opening jobs, nevertheless, it's not acceptable that this company will take will use so much fund that the other activities that are foreseen will not take place. So I don't worry about this at this moment. That is not what I feel as the critical thing. I feel the other aspect that I think you mentioned, it's the kind of how to organize the schemes so that these ideas of good alternatives can really be implemented. So what kind of advice do you need? Do young people, do you have other entrepreneurs? Are you calling for entrepreneurs coming from other areas to start a business there? What can you offer them? Can you create your own business? I don't mean Piotr, it will be very good for you in particular if you do it, because you are very active and bright, but people coming from the university and they have a good idea. Do they have a desk where they can get the advice and address the finance? But there are places where you are creating it. So let's share these experiences and let's use this positive move in order really to implement what our dreams are. Because the difficult thing is when we go into the ground and we try to, and there are lots of barriers, but when we succeed, it's great.
We've spoken a lot about the issues that you all feel very passionately about. In the remaining 20 minutes, before we have some final conclusions, I'd like to concentrate specifically on how youth is involved, where it works well, where it could be done better, and your actual concerns about the engagement of youth. Luciana, I'm going to start with you, because one of the areas you wanted to bring up was monitoring. So, and you don't know whether anything has worked unless you have the data. So over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sasha. It's possibly the least sort of appealing topic when you talk about anything in general is monitoring and evaluation. People just take a bit of a snooze when you bring up those words, but it is absolutely the most important to know what baseline are you starting from? what are the indicators of success when it comes to youth engagement? So how are we going through the programming and implementation phases of the transition plans going to be assessing how successfully they are engaging youth? Is this engagement meaningful? Do we have a definition that we all agree on of meaningful youth engagement? And what are the indicators that we're looking at? And this goes back again to the idea of administrative capacity and institutional capacity to actually do this monitoring. So we have a lot of great ideas in terms of young people needing to be engaged. We have some ideas of which NGOs to approach. But how do you then follow through with how have they actually been engaged? Have they been engaged in the first place? Was it a key point in the process? How were their ideas implemented? Because I think one of the most important parts of the sort of cycle of engaging youth is the closing the circle. It's the follow-up. So young people do have a lot of energy. They come through with ideas. They come through with opportunities that can be put forward in these areas. And of course, there's a lot of opportunities, like you were saying, Elisa, for revitalizing these depressed regions. But there needs to be some kind of certainty about what is going to happen in the future. And that applies from the ideation stage. Young people come and participate. They give ideas, they give proposals. What happens next? How are these implemented? And how do you have that transparency that you were talking about in terms of seeing how the drafts are being prepared and where the input of young people is being considered before it's, I don't want to say too late, but before we actually have a published draft that is going to be implemented regardless of what anyone says. So in a nutshell, I think it's about just being really conscious that this is a marathon. And it's not a sprint of putting together a plan that brings in input from young people. It's about then the long haul. And we're not just talking about the just transition here. One of the other points I want to bring in, which I think is particularly problematic for Romania in particular, is that we tend to be quite patchy when we do things. There is a lack of system thinking, a lack of integration of all these plans and strategies with each other. So how does the Just Transition Plan leverage the Recovery and Resilience Plan, which has a big piece around vocational training, for example, but there's no clarity, there's no transparency in where this vocational training is actually going to take place. Is it going to be in these regions? Because it would be great, it would be very efficient. We would be able to deliver a lot more if we looked at things in an integrated way. And just to finish, that's also the reason why I think Piotr was saying that I jotted down, you don't know what the change is going to look like because you have dozens of strategies at national level that filter down to plans at regional and local level that don't sit together. They don't come together. So you don't know what it's going to look like in your region. You don't know what you returning there is actually going to look like for you. And you're an investor as a young person. You're investing in your future in this region. So we need to start thinking in this way. Can I invest if I don't have certainty? The answer is no, if you look at it from an investor perspective. And I would say as a young person, that's how I look at it as well. Do I have regulatory certainty? Do I have financial certainty? Do I have those safety nets in place that I can actually go and start something up in this region? Thank you.
Well, very good questions that we get from you. And you touch upon two aspects. One is how we monitor things from the first moment till the end, and then combining the different sources of funding across a vision. And this is exactly what we are doing. I was yesterday discussing the partnership agreement of Romania, for instance, with Minister Bolos, exactly, and with his colleagues, exactly trying to figure out, because cohesion policy, that's what we do. We look at the regions and we try to develop a plan for each region that stops this divergence, this fracture. That is a fracture that is very, very clear when we look at or a risk of a fracture that is even clearer when we look at these specific spots where we have this just transition. But then you have regions of mountain, you have regions that are very isolated, you have peripheral regions, you have the outermost regions, you have industrial regions in decline, you have rural regions, and so we are trying to adapt this funding in order that you have for each space a kind of how you can address it, how you can develop it. And one of the things that we are always asking member states to do is, in fact, to use the different instruments they have in their hands. And now we have the recovery and resilience plans, and we have also the cohesion funding. Cohesion funding is often it's not perceived, but because it is so important and so structural. Look at the highways, look at the sewage systems, look at the schools, look at and this cohesion funding that is the regional fund and social fund, and social fund is managed by the group of people under the control of Nicolas. So I mean this. And of course, we work on this vision that is what we discuss with member states, because member states are the interlocutors, but then we ask them to narrow down the approach on each of in the case of Romania, 8 different regions. We go and we look and we tell them, okay, what is your vision for this region? And of course, this requires a kind of what will be the role played by the most dynamic poles that you already have, by the institutions that are already there, by the universities that are already there. But for each of these programs, of these plans, you have a monitoring committee. And this monitoring committee is the one that was reinforced now. And of course, we try that member states, because this is on the basis of a partnership. We are not imposing to member states what they should do. I mean, they are democratically elected. They are knowledgeable, and citizens are knowledgeable. So it's not an imposition. So it's place-based, it's bottom-up. And for each of the operational programs, you have to have a monitoring committee, a committee that follows up and that discusses since the beginning, since the outline. And then there are periodic sessions. And in this period, that is the multi-annual programs for 21-27, so multi-annual development strategies. For these, we even reinforce the power of the entities that sit in these monitoring committees, because they can vote. They cannot decide in the name of the managing authority, but they can vote, and we can see the vote. So they can express their agreement, their disagreement, their suggestions. And this was an improvement. We also, as I mentioned before, there is an element in all the programs of technical assistance on which we can help these entities to reinforce their knowledge. Because one aspect, I mean, of course we are addressing young people, but you are very active, intelligent, engaged people. But there are young people that, like old people, that have nothing to say. So it's not just the status of having young people. So what we ask member states is, okay, try to bring in representative people from society, including young people, but you have got to be organized somehow, to be active somehow, and to be informed enough, so that your contribution is not just this kind of Christmas tree kind of things, or criticizing, but proposing, suggesting. And of course, these monitoring committees are the structure on which we anchor this following up. And because they have a calendar of meetings on which you are, the managing authority is supposed to share the information and to listen to the opinions and to the suggestions. This is how we have organized things. But then, one thing is how we organize it, the skeleton of the thing. Then the other thing is the muscle you put in it. And we cannot decide this muscle at the European level. We have got to go to have this partnership with civil society, and the quality of the suggestions, what you do, what you say, how active you are, makes actually a difference, because this is, from our point of view, democracy in action. So it's up to you to make sure that your vision, your ideas, your constructive proposals, that they get through. And I go back to Piotr because it was a very practical example of how things changed in terms of the vision, now changing in terms of implementation. You have got to go on being part of this network. Also, something that I'd like to note, a lot or most of the things that we decide at the European level, and even all the legislation, they have a consulting period. They have a period where we put in the net and we ask for opinions, and these opinions matter. We have staff just reading all these suggestions, all these opinions. So make sure that you are active in this overall, not only, I mean, of course, in the areas where you are already developing the know-how and the activism, but make sure that, because there are lots of things on which, in fact, you have got to be attentive and to be participating so that your voice is heard, because that's the mechanism with so many people and so many actors that we invented to try to listen to your voice. But I mean, this is what we can do. But if there are improvements that you think of, bring them through, tell us, and we'll try to incorporate them. It's not easy, but we'll try to do it.
Annie, before you come in there, I just want to have a quick word on whose voices are heard, because it was mentioned earlier about a lot of disengaged youth that you also mentioned. And I know earlier when we were talking about that, Commissioner Schmit, that was something that you picked up on. And I don't know whether you want to come in on that and how to ensure that everyone is listened to, particularly right at the very beginning when Luciana's talking about collecting the data. You have to have the right data. You have to speak and listen to the right people.
Yes, I think that's an important point to include everybody, and especially those who are forgotten already in the existing system. That's the point. Especially those we call the needs, those who are not in education, not in employment, and who have not even the possibility to move because they have not the skills to move, and so at least they have to be included, and they have to also as finding solutions for them. And you mentioned vocational training. Yes, I think vocational training is now something we are pushing very much, and especially this is also part of this systemic approach we need in the areas. Two remarks, if you allow. First, what is the responsibility of the companies who leave or who are closed? I would not say that they have no responsibility. They have to be included also in this. Now, there is a difference if everything is now geared to their needs, to their interests. No, but they have to be also put into a position of responsibility to participate into the restructuring and renewal of the region. So I think this is and here we are, and somebody mentioned that on, I think, on labor market policies, that, well, you just dismiss people and you leave. That's it. And your responsibility is none. And I think we have proposed a system we call EASE, so a labor market policy where those who maybe have to dismiss have a responsibility for those they will dismiss. And they have to be integrated in the process of reskilling, finding a new job, because that's the transition, the personal transition. We are talking about the global transition, but people also, they have to live a transition for themselves. And so the responsibility to organize this personal transition cannot just be left to public or to new employer. It's also somebody who has employed these people for a while. So we have to rethink this. And that's also a question of social dialogue involving social partners, but also unions, how this is managed, because and especially when companies just close and go somewhere else because wages are lower. I know there are some cases. Here, certainly we have possibilities to support also financially. We have this Global Adjustment Fund where people are supported to in that case. But I think what is important is that in order to not to have more and more divides and lost parts in the society, we have to include the more marginalized or disadvantaged groups absolutely, and find right solutions for them also in order skilling. Well, today it's the day of the launch of a project, a new project, European project called ALMA, which addresses precisely this kind of young people who are very often demotivated. They have lost already their confidence because they have the impression that there's no place for them. And so we are launching now this project, saying, okay, first you are European needs, as President von der Leyen said, Europe needs all its youth, also those who might be a bit in a more difficult situation. And the idea is to give them opportunities to work in another country. Why in another country? Because this is something which they never expected, perhaps, to go somewhere else and to get this kind of opportunity. When you are a student, you have Erasmus. Even as an apprentice, you can have with more difficulties, but you can eventually have an experience abroad. But these are young people who never get this opportunity. So to create this opportunity, to help build confidence among them, to give them the possibility to find a job for a period somewhere else and then come back having got a new experience and then find a job in the place where they are coming from. So I think this is something we have to include.
Annick, let me come to you on that one, and then we have time just to open the floor to any final questions. So, Linda, I think you have one there. But Annick, first of all.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was just, there's a lot of things going through my mind listening to whatever's being said here at the panel, and thank you so much for all of your contributions. One thing that I notice is that often when we're talking about young people, we're talking about them as agents of change, as you so nicely said. And I completely agree, and I think that's the potential that our generation holds, and that is something that we should hold on to and help them foster. What I like less about that perspective is that sometimes the idea is that, or it's being portrayed as if only if we tried harder or worked harder, then we would really be listened to. Whereas I do think that it's a two-way street where we need to, obviously youth have to unite themselves and work together to kind of make sure that politicians listen to them. But I do think it has to come from the other side as well. And I like hearing that obviously the European Union has so many initiatives as well, but I thought maybe it'd be nice to kind of sum up some things that not just the European Union can do, but also maybe people listening to the panel to kind of make sure that young people are really are empowered to make the contributions that they can. And I was just thinking of maybe a list of things that, and it's just a short list, and I do invite my fellow panel members to add to the list if they want. But I think one of the things that is very important and that is very much lacking still is inclusivity. And it's being mentioned before, but I think, Lorenzo, you mentioned that while you were writing the report, there was actually very little information that was available for you to do the monitoring that you wanted to do. And I think this is one of the many things, especially for an institution like the European Union, that is very much lacking, where if young people want to contribute, it's actually very hard for them to understand how the European Union works and where there are opportunities for them to contribute. So I think the inclusivity and being transparent about where those opportunities lies, that is something that we can very much make a lot of progress on still. I think the second thing that I thought of was capacity. So I think when I talk about capacity of younger generations, it's not just funding, a very important thing, but financial capacity, obviously, to make the contributions that they want to make. But also the other resources available. So this is also knowledge on how to participate, for instance. And then I think third, and how the European Union can, even through the Just Transition mechanism, can really contribute is really being more open about what the inherent and added value of youth participation really is. Because I think all of the 6 panelists here can tell you what this added value is, but it's definitely not something that is something that politicians throughout Europe are aware of. And I think Piotr's example about the meeting that he attended, I think is a very good example where I hope that maybe the European Union, without obviously imposing on countries and taking away from their democratic power, can maybe help disperse the information or share the information about what the added value of youth participation really is, and how local authorities can really help empower these young people.
Well, I saw smiles and I felt a from this side as well. I'll let you address that in your final words, because I'm very conscious of time. Let's just get a very, very quick couple of final thoughts from everyone. Linda, I know you had something you wanted to bring in.
Yeah, I have a final question. How do you intend to accelerate the development of individual technologies, for example, hydrogen, in order to implement the goals of the Green Deal in a timely manner? And I want to give you I want to talk about a very important project. Maybe we have time. I think it's short. The innovative storage power plant. This combines both sustainable energy carriers, hydrogen, and the renewable energy sources, wind and solar. And the project became a pioneer for Lusatia and also for other regions. Particularly important for me because I am the youth and trainee representative in my company, is that it will also create new jobs and also apprenticeships. And very short how it works. The heart of the storage power plant is a turbine system, and doing yet it will be supplied with gas and later 100% with hydrogen. It's important that the current state of technology, research and development must always be taken into account. And how quickly this can be released, that we use 100% hydrogen, depends on the current state of technology. Electricity is produced in a turbine, which can be fed into the power grid. And so several industries and households can be supplied with electricity. And I think we know it. We need all electricity. And two other modules are a steam plant and electrolyzer. And in the thermal storage unit, we can generate heat from renewable energies and we can store it. And in the electrolyzer module, hydrogen is produced. And with the help of renewable energies, we can also store it. And you see this project is very important. An entire region, private households and industry or transport can be safely supplied with green electricity. And in addition, we can become pioneers in the use and further development of new technologies and makes a major contribution to achieving the climate neutrality.
Linda, thank you very much. It's an interesting example, actually, of where actually new jobs have been created in an area. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. The sort of project that maybe we've been talking about over the last couple of hours. I'm very conscious of time, so it's just going to come to our final thoughts on this one. Commissioner Schmit, would you like to give a few final thoughts on everything that you have heard today before I come to you?
Well, I must first thank you all for the very rich debate and the very large and rich contributions. showing your ideas, and I think that politicians have a big interest to listen more to young people. I think this is something we will try to convey, that a lot of good ideas, initiatives, and I would say also persuasion is coming from the young generation. So I think not just in speeches, but in reality, young people should be much more listened to. So this is, I think, my lesson from this debate, that I learned a lot, and I'm convinced that we have to strengthen this kind of exchanges. So now on all the details, I think there's a lot of good ideas, we are a period anyway of innovation. We need innovation at all levels, not just technological innovation, but also social innovation in all areas. I could have talked about social economy. It was mentioned. We are pushing that very much. So I think, I hope that it's not the only kind of debate we have in this context. And I thank you very much for all I was able to learn today. Thank you.
Well, I think my colleague and friend Nicolas Schmit made the right sum up of this meeting. So I'll just also myself thank you very, very much. I think if we don't listen to you and to people like you, we all in Europe are losing a lot. It is in our interest, in fact, to bring in fresh attitudes, fresh energy, new ideas, new proposals. I listened to all the things that you said, and I think you spotted everything that you mentioned, all the details. They are relevant. They are a concern for us, and I'll take them very, very careful, so that in fact we make the best possible use of the situation we are living through. But having said this, I think I go back to the basic message. We can only work in a partnership. So all this energy, all this dialogue, there are lots of things going on, lots of things happening, and so I think the most important outcome is that you take your energy to the right level as well, and because our concern is to find the right messages, the right plans, the right programs, based on the different realities that you all share, with lots of elements in common. But then when you go to the ground, each region, its municipality, its community, it's a different one. They have different assets, different liabilities, different blocking elements that need to be overcome. And so it's only from the place at the right level. You cannot discuss everything or this big transformation just at the municipal level. Sometimes you have got to go a bit up, but find the right place where you can put in your ideas, your energy. And from our side, I'll be very attentive to the suggestions that were made, but it's a partnership, it's a network. So we have got to go to the ground and receive from the regional level the right message, the right information, and the capacity to act. Because we are all full of good ideas, then when it goes to the ground, when it's the moment to implement, that's where sometimes things become more critical, because it's difficult. And otherwise it would have been done, but that's the reason why we are here, because we need to have challenges and to win against all the obstacles in our way, because you deserve a good future. We all do.
That sounds like the most perfect place to leave.
Thank you, Elisa, for organising this.
Many thanks indeed for your organisation. And can we suggest that maybe a message to the member states and those watching this: working partnership, people engaged from the very beginning, strengthen exchanges, and a lot of information, and a lot of thoughts to take away from this meeting from everyone. Linda, Giacomo, Annick, Pietro, Luciana and Lorenzo. Commissioner Schmit, Commissioner Ferreira, thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you've all found this enjoyable. And I hope you've enjoyed watching this exchange, this panel as well. We will now hand you over to the next session, talking about reskilling and future-proofing jobs. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you.